Hi, everyone. So this video is going to go over the PowerPoint on Introduction to Writing. So before we really start getting into learning specific skills, I wanted to take a little bit of time to sort of set the foundation for what we're really going to be focusing on throughout the term. Okay, so go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint here. Okay. All right, so here we go. We are covering the first chapter, Introduction to Writing, right? And, I think sometimes people, when they think of an English class, a composition class, or just writing in general, they start to get a little bit of anxiety over it. They think they're not good at it, or that it's hard, or what have you. And really writing is just another form of communication. And we communicate in various ways all the time. Writing is just one way we can do that. And sometimes writing might be the only way you can do that. But every day we communicate. Every day we make claims and assertions verbally. We'll say things like, I hate my job, or Cracker Barrel has great food at reasonable prices, or that exam was so unfair, or that exam was so hard, or that doctor is so arrogant, or that doctor is so obnoxious. We say things, we make claims, we make statements all the time verbally. However, in casual conversation, the people that you're talking to, especially if they're, acquaintances or coworkers, perhaps, they don't always challenge you to give reasons for your statements. They might allow you to sort of expand on what you said because, they're interested or because they care about you, but they don't demand reasons, they don't demand that you back up the claim you made. Like if you're talking to your friend and you say something like, oh my gosh, that exam was so unfair, they might say, oh, why do you think that? But if it's a friend, more than likely, they're just gonna be like, oh man, that's too bad. Like something should be done about that. Like they just have your back. Like, they just accept what you say. When you're in conversation, you are not always expected to back up your statements, right? However, when you are writing, especially in an academic setting, your readers don't know you necessarily. They may not agree with you, or they may not feel obligated to just believe you or take you at your word. So if you want to communicate effectively in writing, you have to provide evidence for any point that you make. You have to support it. So an important difference between talking and writing is that in writing, any idea that you advance must be supported with specific reasons or details or examples. You have to explain yourself, right? You don't always have to do that in conversation, but in writing, especially in a school setting, an academic setting, a professional setting, you do. It's just part of what is expected when you are using writing as your communication tool, right? So we're going to be looking at paragraph writing to start. And a paragraph is a short piece of writing that advances one focused idea or topic. So it's a self-contained unit that covers one main focused idea. A paragraph should consist of an opening point sentence. The very first sentence, it's called the topic sentence, should tell us what that point is, what that focused topic is. And then that topic sentence will be followed by a series of sentences that then support that point. So everything in that paragraph is related to that specific topic in the topic sentence. And then the rest of the sentences support that idea. And the evidence that supports the point of the paragraph is often like a series of reasons. You know, you're going to use examples and details. You know, could be anecdotes, personal experience, facts, studies, statistics, expert opinions. And that just depends on what type of writing you're doing, who you're writing it for, why you're writing it, and what that focused point is. That will help determine what kind of support you use, but some type of support does have to be there, and it all has to relate back to that focused topic in the first sentence, right? So what we have on this screen is just some examples of how we can have a focused topic, which would be in that first sentence, and then the ideas we might discuss in the rest of the paragraph that support that main point. So if you see here on this side, let's say all the rest of the sentences in this paragraph, you know, not the first sentence, but all the rest, they're gonna, you know, all of those sentences are gonna talk about things like having a runny nose, or coughing, or sneezing, or having a sore throat. So those are the specific ideas that are being used as support in the body of the paragraph. Based on those four things, what can we assume is that general topic that would be in the topic sentence? So we have some options here. Would we say that this paragraph, the focus topic is symptoms? Well, runny nose, coughing, sneezing, sore throat, yeah, they are symptoms. But the word symptoms refers to a wide variety of different things. So just to say symptoms is the topic of this paragraph is too general. It's not focused enough, right? Throat problems. Well, we do have sore throat as one of our examples here, right? But that idea is too narrow because the list has other things that don't involve your throat. Runny nose, coughing, sneezing, and coughing kind of throat, but you know, runny nose, sneezing, those don't really fit under that main focused idea of throat problems. So that's too narrow. So really, what these ideas are examples of are cold symptoms. Cold symptoms is the general idea of this paragraph. So our first sentence of our paragraph, our topic sentence, would somehow mention cold symptoms. And then the rest of the paragraph would then give, you know, talk about these types of cold symptoms: runny nose, coughing, sneezing, sore throat, right? Over here, same idea, right? So most of the paragraph is gonna use these examples: placing sticky notes all over someone's car, or filling a person's office with balloons, or covering the walls of a friend's living room with pictures of cats, right? So if those are our three examples, what is the topic of this paragraph? Is it jokes? Well, yes, those three ideas are jokes, but jokes refers to a whole lot more than just the kinds of things that these three examples are doing, you know, because jokes can also be just verbal jokes. They can be puns. They can be, you know, short jokes with, you know, really funny punchlines, or they can be sort of a long drawn out joke where, you know, a story is being told and then at the very end, we get some sort of laugh out of it. So jokes refers to just too many different things that aren't included in those specific ideas. So jokes is too general, too broad, all right? Practical jokes played on coworkers. Well, these are kind of examples of practical jokes, right? Placing sticky notes all over someone's car, filling a person's office with balloons, covering the wall with cat pictures. Yeah, those are practical jokes, but are they all practical jokes played on coworkers? No, because placing sticky notes all over someone's car, that doesn't specify that it's a coworker. And covering the walls of a friend's living room, that's not a coworker. So playing practical jokes played on coworkers is too narrow, right? It doesn't fit those specific ideas either. So really, the general topic of this paragraph, what we would say in our topic sentence, we would somehow mention practical jokes. And then these would be our 3 examples of practical jokes, right? So your topic sentence, sorry, we got some coppers in the background if you can hear that. So our topic sentence, that first sentence of the paragraph, has to reveal that specific focus in the paragraph, and then the examples in the rest of the paragraph match up directly to that focused topic. There's not going to be any outliers or anything that doesn't fit under that topic. It's all going to be connected, right? There's going to be a part of your assignment for this week where you actually have something like this, where you're going to be given a list of specific ideas, and then you're going to have, choices to just what you think the general idea is. So you're going to want to apply those principles when you're doing that assignment as well, like looking at the specific ideas, and then kind of even coming up in your mind with what you think the general topic is. But then look at the list and then decide which one fits best. Which general idea actually encompasses these specific ideas, right? So there's going to be another part of the assignment where it's very similar. And it's going to look a lot like this slide, where you're still given your list of specific ideas, but then you have to actually come up with the general idea. You have to state it in your own words. You're not going to have a list to choose from anymore. So here we have this list of specific ideas: washing dishes, preparing meals, taking out the trash, and dusting. So what is the general idea of this paragraph? What would we say in our topic sentence? What would we mention in that first sentence that encapsulates those 4 specific ideas? Remember, you don't want to be too general, right? You don't want to be too narrow, right? So how would you label the general idea of this list of specifics, right? Oops, right? Well, probably something like household chores, right? Because that's what all 4 of those are examples of. You might have just said chores. You might have said, housework. It doesn't have to be the exact same words that I have here, household chores. As long as it is similar to that, though, then you had the right idea. So over here, we have another list of specific ideas. So this paragraph, the examples that are going to be used are, we've got different colored glitter. We've got multi-themed craft paper. We've got a hot glue gun. We've got ribbons, buttons, and bows, right? So those are the specific ideas that we're using in the body of the paragraph. What is the general idea that we would state in our topic sentence? What are those 4 things examples of? How are they all 4 related to each other? What do they have in common? Well, you don't want to be too general. You don't want to be too narrow. So looking at those 4 specific ideas, to me, those are all items that you would find in a crafting room, or items for crafting, right? A well-stocked craft room, or a well-stocked, craft drawer, or something along those lines. As long as you kind of could figure out that the thing that these 4 ideas have in common is that they're used for crafting, then you're doing it right. Now, there are variations because, are we explaining, is that paragraph supposed to explain what you need? for a well-stocked craft room? Or is it going to explain what your favorite crafting items are? You know, we don't have that level of knowledge just yet. All we know is that these 4 ideas are going to be discussed in the body of the paragraph. What do they all have in common? Crafting. So as long as you're in that ballpark, then you're on the right track. You're understanding how we have a general topic in that topic sentence, and then all of the ideas in the rest of the paragraph relate directly to that topic, right? Okay. All right, so now let's look at an example of a paragraph. This is called My Job in an Apple Plant. So again, think of what we just sort of went over, that the first sentence of the paragraph is going to establish the general idea. The rest of the paragraph is then going to provide specific examples or specific ideas that relate directly to that topic sentence. All right. Working in an apple plant was the worst job I ever had. First of all, the work was physically hard. For 10 hours a night, I took cartons that rolled down a metal track and stacked them onto wooden skids in a tractor trailer. Each carton contained 25 pounds of bottled apple juice, and they came down the track almost nonstop. The second bad feature of the job was the pay. I was getting the minimum wage at that time, $4.50 an hour, plus 50 cents extra for working the night shift. I had to work over 60 hours a week to get decent take-home pay. Finally, I hated the working conditions. We were limited to 2 10-minute breaks and an unpaid half hour for lunch. Most of my time was spent outside on the loading dock in near 0-degree temperatures. I was very lonely on the job because I had no interest in common with the other truck loaders. I felt this isolation especially when the production line shut down for the night and I spent 2 hours by myself cleaning the apple vats. The vats were an ugly place to be on a cold morning, and the job was a bitter one to have. Okay, let's look here. What is the focused topic of the paragraph? What was in the topic sentence that let us know exactly what was going to be discussed? Working in an apple plant was the worst job I ever had. So that's the focused topic. That's what all the rest of the sentences are going to relate to. Everything else in that paragraph should in some way relate back to his statement that it was the worst job he ever had. What were the main ideas given to support that focused topic? Well, first of all, the work was physically hard. The second bad feature of the job was the pay. Finally, I hated the working conditions. So those are our 3 main ideas in the paragraph: physically hard work, low pay, bad working conditions. And those 3 ideas all relate back to this focused topic sentence. Those are the 3 reasons why it was the worst job he ever had. It all matches up. Then we also had, he went into detail about each one of those reasons. He gave examples and explained himself for every single one. So when he talks how, first of all, the work was physically hard, he talks about how he worked 10 hours a night, how he stacked heavy cartons, how those cartons came down the track fast, right? So all of those examples in that section support his statement that the work was physically hard, and the work being physically hard is the first reason why it was the worst job he ever had. His second main idea was that the pay was bad, right? He talked how he worked for minimum wage plus 50 cents an hour for the night shift, and how he still had to work 60 or more hours just to bring home decent pay. So those examples relate directly to how the job did not pay well, and the job not paying well is his second reason why it was the worst job he ever had. Oh, sorry, I'll do it again. His third main idea was how he hated the working conditions. In that section, he talks how he only had 2 10-minute breaks and a 30-minute lunch, mostly outside in the cold, lonely and isolated, and cleaning apple vats alone in the cold. those ideas all relate directly to the bad working conditions. They're all examples of the bad working conditions. And those bad working conditions are the third reason why it was the worst job he ever had. So going back, looking at that paragraph, you can see exactly what he did. He's got that focused topic sentence here, working in an apple plant was the worst job I ever had. I know when I read that first sentence that the rest of this paragraph is going to somehow relate to that topic. He's going to do something. He's going to talk about something with this particular job and why it was the worst job he ever had. Right? First of all, the work was physically hard. Oh, okay. Got it. What you're really doing is you're going to tell me why it was the worst job you ever had. And the first reason is the work was physically hard. Got it. And then he knows that I'm in my mind going to think, okay, well, what do you mean by the work was physically hard? How was it physically hard? Well, he's giving me examples. 10 hours a night, took cartons on the tractor trailers, 25 pounds each. They came down the track fast. Got it. Okay. Thank you for explaining what you mean when you say the work was physically hard. Got it. All right. The second bad feature of the job was the pay. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, got it. That's your second reason why it was the worst job ever. And he knows that I'm immediately going to think to myself, well, what does he mean by the second bad feature was the pay? Why was the pay so bad? Why did that make it the worst job ever? He knows I'm going to ask that. He knows I'm going to want examples. So he gives them to me, right? Minimum wage, $4.50 an hour plus 50 cents for working the night shift. Had to work over 60 hours a week just to bring home decent take-home pay. Got it. Okay. Finally, I hated the working conditions. All right. That's your third reason why it's the worst job you ever had. I got it. Physically hard work, low pay, bad working conditions. He knows that I'm going to want examples of why the working conditions were so bad. And he gives them, right? 2 10-minute breaks, unpaid half-hour lunch, outside and, freezing cold. Didn't have any friends really on the job and, was stuck doing some really awful work by himself. Got it, right? The bats were an ugly place to be on a cold morning, and the job was a bitter one to have. I finished reading this paragraph and I understand everything. He stuck to his topic. Working in an apple plant was the worst job I ever had. Every single sentence in that paragraph relates directly back to that topic. Nothing goes out of focus. There's nothing else in this paragraph that doesn't belong there. And he gave me 3 reasons why it was the worst job he ever had. And for each of those 3 reasons, he gave me specific examples. So that is what we mean when we say that a paragraph has a focused point and that everything else in the paragraph supports that focused point, right? Now, if this were on our homework assignment, like the previous slides, these would be the specific ideas that were listed. Physically hard work, low pay, bad working conditions. The general idea of the paragraph is why I hated working in an apple plant. So you've kind of seen how it's going to look on the assignment, and then how those lists of specific ideas and the general idea kind of translate into paragraph form, right? Because back up here, on these 2 slides, all we had was the list of specific ideas and the general idea, right? But now here, you get to see how that would look in paragraph form. The general idea is here in the topic sentence. The specific ideas are what we advance and explain in the rest of the paragraph. Okay, that's what it would look like. So mastering the structure of writing a paragraph is going to make you a better writer. It strengthens your skills as a reader and a listener. It will make you a stronger thinker because you are coming up with a focus, and you know that you have to have some specific ideas to support that focus, and that each of those specific ideas will need their own ideas and examples, right? So you've kind of got this, hierarchy. You guys can see, like you have your topic sentence, the focus of the paragraph here, and then you have your main ideas, your specific ideas here. But each of those specific ideas also needs examples to help explain them. So down here, these are your examples. They help support each of your specific ideas. The specific ideas help support the topic, right? And if you even just, as you learn to think that way about having that focus, having specific ideas, using examples to explain each of those specific ideas, you are practicing, communicating effectively. You're practicing how to stay on topic and how to use examples and support to back up what you say. It is necessary when you are writing in an academic and professional setting, but it's also helpful to start thinking that way, because you'll start to organize your thoughts that way naturally, even if you are communicating verbally. So writing, getting the foundation of just writing a paragraph is super helpful. And that's kind of where we're starting. But before we actually start, writing paragraphs, there's something else that we need to consider before we sit down and write something. And that is called the rhetorical situation. Right, so we've sort of explained here why written communication is important, why it's important to know what a paragraph is and how it is structured with that focus topic, specific ideas, and supporting examples. But how do you know what to write? I mean, yeah, okay, I get it. I have a focus topic, I have specific ideas, and then I have examples for each of those ideas. But what should that topic be? What should those specific ideas be? What should those examples be? Right? I gotta come up with that stuff first, don't I? Before I can just sit and write what I want to write, what I need to write. We want to consider the rhetorical situation first. The rhetorical situation consists of 5 elements: topic, angle, purpose, audience, and tone. Topic. What am I writing about? What is my focused topic? And by the way, the rhetorical situation applies to any time you're writing, whether it's a single paragraph, an essay, a research paper, what have you. These are all things you need to consider before you write anything, or before you even give like a presentation or what have you. You always want to think about these elements first. What am I writing about, or what am I talking about? What is my focus topic? Because you don't want to be too vague and too broad, but you don't want to be so narrow either. So you have to figure out, what am I writing about? Then you have your angle, and that's sort of like okay, so what? What do I have to say that's different about this topic? Because no matter what your topic is, at this point in human history, that topic has probably been written about 100,000 million times. So, and that's not to say that means you shouldn't write about it, but you do need to think, okay, what am I bringing to the table that's different? How am I approaching this topic in a way that is unique or different? How's my perspective different than what everybody else's is who's already written on this topic? You want to have your angle, because what you really don't want to do is for what you write to sound just like everything else that's been written. You want to make it yours, okay? And then this one is very important. your purpose. Why am I writing about this topic? What should happen as a result? What do I want my readers to gain by reading my work? Now, in an academic setting, it's very possible that the reader is simply your instructor. Maybe your classmates, depending on the situation, on the specific class. But when we write, we don't want to think about it as an assignment. We want to consider the possibility that anyone could end up reading your work. Your instructor, your classmates, someone else at your school, someone else on the other side of the world. So you want to write as if, you are writing just for the sake of writing on your topic. So what do you want your readers to gain from it? How do you want it to affect them? What are you trying to accomplish by writing this particular piece on this particular topic? Knowing your topic, your angle, and your purpose really set the foundation for success in writing. Because if we don't have those three things sort of figured out, we get very lost in our writing. And especially if it's an essay or a longer piece, we can get really lost. and everything sort of falls apart and nothing's connected and nothing seems to really land on a specific common thread. We're just kind of all over the place. So if you have these things figured out ahead of time, or at least very early in your process, you have a very solid foundation and you are less likely to get lost in your writing. The other two components are pretty important too, though. Where would we go? So we'll get to those in just a moment. But I do want to sort of spend some time on those first three because they are big ones. So, okay, you need to have a focused topic. How do you get there? First of all, you got to think about who's choosing your topic. It might be something that the instructor, requires you to write about, or your boss, or maybe you get to come up with your own topic, right? But what's the scope? You got to think Goldilocks here. If you go too big with your topic, too broad, and you might run out of time, or you might add too much, you might leave your topic underdeveloped. Because you want to be able to provide those examples for each specific idea that you're using to support the topic. And if you're trying to go too big, you might have 10 specific ideas that you're trying to cover, but then you can't give as many examples for all 10 of those. Because then, what's supposed to be a paragraph ends up being this long, and that's just too much. Or, we're talking about an essay that was supposed to be 5 pages, it was like 10, because you're giving examples and supporting each of those main ideas. Or you're not giving the examples, and you're just, stating the idea, the main idea, but then not giving the examples to explain it. That's also problematic because you have to give the examples. You have to explain each of your main ideas. So you run the risk of either going really long or staying at the right length, but nothing is developed like it should be. You don't want to go too small with your topic, with your focus, because then you won't have as much to say, or like no one's going to be interested, or if you can't really go anywhere with it. You want to shoot for something that is just right. You want to think about how much time you have, if it's an assignment or a project at work, how much time do you have to get this done? Think about your audience and their interests. Think about your purpose. Those things will help you come up with your topic. I had this student one time. Let me make sure, yeah. So I had this student one time who they were doing argumentative research papers, and he wanted his initial topic that he brought to me was on the 9/11 conspiracies. Bit of a conspiracy theorist, and that's cool. You could go for it. I wasn't really, I wasn't too concerned about the idea of this topic, but I was concerned about the scope of this topic, because when he listed all of the different conspiracies that go into the bigger theory, it was like massive. It was a really big list, and I'm like, dude, you can't. This is supposed to be a 5-page paper. How are you going to go through every single one of these individual theories and explain them fully so that I believe you when you say that it was all a big conspiracy? You can't do that in 5 pages. You're either going to go to like 20 pages or you're not going to prove it to me, because you're going to be just going through each one of them so quickly and saying very little about each of them that it's not going to convince me of anything. And he was like, oh, well, what do I do? And I'm like, well, you need to narrow your focus. And so we went back and forth, asking him questions to sort of get him to think about, where he truly wants to go with the paper and whatnot. And he landed on a very focused topic that fell under the umbrella of the 9/11 conspiracy theories, right? But the one he chose was manageable. He could tackle that single conspiracy in a 5-page argumentative research paper. He could develop it fully so that it was convincing and interesting. And so it was pretty successful in terms of, having a focused topic that's not too broad and not too narrow, but just right for what he was asked to do. So that's sort of what we mean by thinking about the scope of what you're writing, because you got to find that sweet spot, that just right spot, right? For your angle, thinking about what makes your piece different than anything else out there, what is your take? Think about your perspective, think about your experiences, think about how you can make new connections among your topic and other things going on. It's really just, what are you bringing to the table that is going to say something different or say it in a different way about your topic. And you can use pre-writing techniques for this, which we will look at later. You can use a storyboard, which is nice for those who are more visual learners. You can kind of storyboard it out with pictures. But either way, you want to consider questions like, what do I already know? What do I still not know? What has happened to me in regards to this topic? What is my experience? How do I see it? Why do I care? What has changed about this topic? It's really just, if you're doing, let's say if you were writing an essay on the causes of nursing burnout. There's so much research on that topic out in the world that if all you're doing is just collecting source information, you're just going to be repeating the same things that everybody else has already said. But what might you bring to the table that would look at that topic in a different way, right? A different perspective. A lot of it always comes from our own personal experience when we're talking about angle. Now, we can't necessarily write about our personal experience, but that's sort of where we start. We start with our personal experience and how it shapes our view of our topic and how that view might be different than someone else's, right? The main idea here that I want you to take away is thinking about your angle helps set you apart. And so that, it doesn't seem like your instructor is reading a paragraph or an essay that just sounds exactly like 100 others out there. That's what you're trying to avoid, right? Your purpose. So again, this is all about like, why write this? why am I writing this? Is it to inform? Am I simply wanting to provide information about a subject? Am I trying to persuade? Am I trying to convince readers to agree with my point of view? Am I just trying to entertain, right? Do I just want to amuse and delight people, appeal to their sense and imagination, and just, make them happy or scare them or tap into other emotions? Am I just trying to entertain them? Ultimately, you have to think about your readers. What do you want your readers to gain by reading your work? That's what purpose is. Now, if you're writing to inform, then you're going to write it in a very specific way. If you're writing to persuade, you're going to write it in a very specific way. If you're writing to simply entertain, you're going to write it in a different way. So that's why thinking about, like, what am I trying to do can help you figure out your purpose. But you also simply want to think, what do I want my readers to gain out of this? How do I want it to affect them? Once you kind of know that, that can help you figure out, again, how to write it, how to approach it. If I'm trying to inform, there are specific rhetorical patterns that cater to information writing. If I'm trying to persuade, there are different rhetorical patterns that cater themselves to persuasion. If I'm trying to entertain, there are different rhetorical patterns that cater to that type of writing. What is a rhetorical pattern? I keep saying that phrase. Kind of like a genre, right? So, music has different genres. Like, it's all music, right? But, if you are wanting us to feel a certain way, you're going to listen to a certain genre of music. If you are hosting a party and you want your guests to feel a certain way, you're going to play a certain genre of music. So writing is the same. Even in bookstores, we know there's genres. We've got sci-fi, we've got fantasy, we've got horror, we've got true crime, we've got young adult, we've got romance, psychological thriller. We have sort of like the nonfiction sections too. So like even with writing, we kind of understand that it's broken into genres. And in the academic setting, that happens as well. Now, we don't have young adult rhetorical patterns. We don't have sci-fi and fantasy and things like that. We have things like narrative and compare contrast and classification and description and process analysis. But they're like genres. Those are rhetorical patterns. We're going to learn a lot more about those in the coming weeks. Okay, but once you kind of understand what your purpose is in the thing you're writing, that will help you determine which rhetorical pattern to use. Or it could be the flip side. You might be given an assignment that says you need to write a compare contrast piece on these topics. Oh, okay. Well, now I've been given the genre or the rhetorical pattern, so I have to stay within those confines, right? Now I kind of know what part of my purpose is. It's kind of built in a little bit, but I still have to determine for myself, okay, like I know my purpose is to compare and contrast these things, but what do I want my reader to get out of it, right? So thinking about purpose can help you figure out how to write it, or if you've been given how to write it, you stay with it, you stay in that lane, but you still have to think ultimately, what do I want my readers to get out of this? Right. The other two elements of the rhetorical situation, right? So we already did topic, angle, and purpose. The fourth one is audience. You have to always think about your audience when you're writing. And you should consider who your audience is pretty early in the process. What does your audience already know about your topic? What do your readers already know? And we're not talking like go out and survey people. We're saying, if you're writing an assignment for a class, you can assume that your audience is your classmates, right? And they're all kind of on the same level as you. What do they already know about the topic? Or, you might be given a research paper on something like the causes of nursing burnout. Well, your audience is nurses or potential nurses. What do they already know about the topic? Why might the reader need or want to read your piece about this topic? Are you trying to just inform them, or are you trying to convince them of something? And if you're trying to inform them, what do they already know, and what do they actually need to be informed on? If you're trying to convince them, what would be the best way to do that? Where, it also, thinking about your audience, helps you understand what type of language and wording you should use. If you're writing for just a very general audience, you don't want to use jargon or terminology that the average person wouldn't understand. If you're writing for a very specific group of people who already know that terminology, then you're fine to use it in your writing, right? Your tone, you have to think about that as well. That relates to your audience and your purpose. That's our last element of the rhetorical situation. Your tone of voice. Just like in conversation, we have a tone of voice. And sometimes, research has shown that sometimes the tone of voice you use is actually more important than the words coming out of your mouth. And I'm sure we've all been there before. In a conversation or in an argument or in some situation where the words the other person says aren't nearly as impactful as how they said it, the tone they used. There is tone in writing also. And just like your tone of voice reveals your attitude on that subject or who you're speaking to, your tone in writing also reveals your attitude towards the subject. Using good tone means having the ability to choose words and adopt a tone of voice that is just right, given your purpose and a group of people, your audience, right? And you have to be very mindful of tone. If you're writing something, to a friend, the tone is going to be very different than if you're writing something to your grandmother or your boss or your coworkers or your instructor. It's there in writing too, just like it is in conversation. Let's do a little practice here. So we have 6 different tones, writing tones: bitter, matter of fact, tolerant and accepting, sentimental, humorous, optimistic, and hopeful. So we've got 6 statements here, and we're going to try and match up the statement with the tone it's giving off. So we're talking about an apartment here. This place may be shabby, but since both of my children were born while we lived here, it has a special place in my heart. The apartment is not fancy, but it meets my needs. If only there were some decent jobs out there, I wouldn't be reduced to living in this miserable dump. Or this place does need some repairs, but I'm sure the landlord will be making improvements sometime soon. When we move away, we're planning to release 300 cockroaches and 2 mice so we can leave the place exactly as we found it. Or it's a small 2-bedroom apartment that needs to be repainted and have the kitchen plumbing repaired. Let's see. So that first statement, this place may be shabby, but since both my children were born while we lived here, it has a special place in my heart. That is a sentimental tone, right? This apartment is clearly not all that great, but she has an emotional attachment to it, and that comes through in the statement that she made. It is sentimental. The second one, the apartment is not fancy, but it meets my needs. All right, well, it's not really matter of fact. It's not bitter, it's not humorous. It doesn't sound very optimistic and hopeful, but it does sound just like it is what it is, right? It's not fancy, but it meets my needs. I am tolerant and accepting of this apartment. If only there were some decent jobs out there, I wouldn't be reduced to living in this miserable dump. Well, I hope that the word miserable dump kind of clued you into this was the bitter tone out of the bunch. And they do sound bitter, right? You get that tone right away. This place does need some repairs, but I'm sure the landlord will be making improvements sometime soon. Obviously, this is very optimistic and hopeful. and, you know, wish you the best. Wouldn't hold my breath. Right? Optimistic and hopeful that the landlord will actually do something. When we move away, we're planning to release 300 cockroaches and 2 mice so we can leave the place exactly as we found it. Obviously, that's the attempt at humorous, right? And then it's a small 2-bedroom apartment that needs to be repainted and have the kitchen plumbing repaired. Well, that's facts, right? Matter of fact. But you can see how each of those statements, and they're all saying kind of the same thing, but with different tones. It clearly, each statement and each tone reveals a very different attitude about this apartment. 6 different attitudes about this particular apartment. And you can tell what each of those 6 attitudes are based on the tone of each statement written. And you can kind of see here on this slide, if you're wanting some extra help, it goes through and explains each one a little more. So I'm going to keep moving on. But basically, you know, you've got this rhetorical situation you got to think about: topic, angle, purpose, audience, and tone. You got to kind of nail those things down early on in your process so that you stay grounded, you have that strong foundation, and you don't get lost and, you know, floating around as you write your piece. We're going to talk about how pre-writing helps get us there. But then, you know, once we sort of have that rhetorical situation in place, then we're getting one step closer to actually writing something. And a lot of people, they just think that, you know, writing is linear, like this. Like you sit down with an assignment that you haven't really even read or thought about yet, but you sit down to do it, and then you just write it until it's done. But writing's more like this. It's very messy. There's a lot of back and forth and changing your mind and realizing that, you know, what sounded like a good idea at first really isn't going to work. So what do I do about that? It's not sounding right. It's not flowing. This idea, this example just doesn't seem to fit with the other types of examples I've used. Yeah, so it's very messy, and it's not linear at all. And everybody thinks that it's supposed to be like this. And maybe sometimes, you know, if it's really easy, if it's small, if it's a small assignment or a small thing you have to write, or something you've already been thinking about, you know, I can do that sometimes. Like I used to do that actually with a lot of my work in college, where I didn't really do a lot of pre-writing techniques on paper, except listing. I would list a lot, but I would think about the topic of my essay. Just think about it at random times. And sometimes I would intentionally just sit down and think about it. And I didn't necessarily write anything down on paper, but I was sort of doing those pre-writing techniques in my mind. And then by the time I sat down to actually write it, I had it kind of figured out in my head. And so I could just start typing. But that's not to say that I got an assignment and sat down and started typing from start to finish and it was good. I did a lot of that pre-work in my head. You know, because that's just how my brain is wired. Other times I did have to actually write stuff to get, you know, to get my thought process where it needed to be. Things actually would be written down in terms of pre-writing, but not always. But very rarely can you just get an assignment or get, you know, have your boss give you a project, or even, you know, write an email that you just immediately sit down and start typing until it's done and it be good. But everybody thinks it's supposed to be like this. They think that this is what writing is. And even for the most seasoned writers, it's like this. Very messy. At least it looks messy. It's really not messy. It's just, you know, it's a process. And you're not always going through it, you know, I'm finished with step 1, so I'm moving on to step 2. Sometimes I get to step 3 and then I got to come back to step 1 and, you know, figure something out. things don't always go exactly as planned. You come up with new ideas. You have an epiphany about something as you're writing, and then it changes everything. You got to kind of backtrack and, and then move yourself forward again. It's, that's writing. All right. It's, if you consider that rhetorical situation ahead of time, though, you're going to set yourself up for success. Because by the time you go to actually start writing, you're going to know what your focus topic is. You're going to know what your aim is, what your purpose is, who your audience is, and what kind of tone you should be using. It helps move you forward in a focused direction so that you don't feel all over the place. All right. Then you can start working on your actual piece of writing. For us, we're going to start with single standalone paragraphs. Later in the term, we will shift our focus to essays, short essays. But here in the first 5-6 weeks of the term, it is just single standalone paragraphs. That's it. You're going to learn to develop a focus point that is encapsulated in a topic sentence. And you're going to learn to advance that focus point with main ideas and supporting examples. Just like we looked at with that paragraph about the job in the apple plant, right? That's what we're going to learn to do in the first half of the term, right? So this is where we're starting, right? Why writing is important, why communication is important, how writing is just a form of communication, but it does require some additional steps that perhaps conversation doesn't always require. We're going to be looking at writing paragraphs that we start with a main focused point, and that then everything else in the paragraph supports that point. We're going to be using the rhetorical situation to ground ourselves and have a good foundation. And that, we're going to accept the fact that writing isn't always a linear journey. And in fact, sometimes it's quite messy, at least on paper. All right, so that is it for this lesson. If you have questions, reach out. I'm always here. Otherwise, you are free to move on to the next lesson.